Welcome to The Backstory, a special series from Future of Faith. In each episode, we take a look behind the scenes of projects from the National Storytelling Initiative on Christian Faith and Life. We'll be pulling back the curtains on our own work, sharing the wins and the struggles, and inviting others on to do the same. We're going to learn from each other and build this community together.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Backstory. This is Elizabeth Coffey. I'm here with Shannon Hopkins and Josh Packard. Before we get into chatting together, I want you to hear from our guest, Mike Horn, who's the managing director and partner of ASHA, a brand identity company. Man, that is not even broad enough to talk about the great work that they do. So before we jump into that interview and then process with Shannon and Josh, here is a little reel for you to watch before we hear from Mike. Okay. Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. So glad that you're tuning in to hear from the brilliant Mike Horn, the managing director of ASHA & Co. ASHA, we've mentioned ASHA a number of times, or Shannon has, because Mike and his team are working closely with their grant initiative. But we want to give you a little bit of a deeper dive into who Mike is and how he thinks about the work that he does, but then also what's the bread and butter of ASHA, and what is the work that they're doing with organizations globally? They've worked with nonprofits, they've worked with government agencies, they've worked with corporations, all around what does it mean to invite people into considering something new and inviting their behavior and action to shift and change along with that consideration. That's how I interpret it. I'm excited to hear how Mike interprets it, but it's brilliant work. Not shying away from some of the most complicated stories and narratives that are going on globally right now, and asking people of all different backgrounds to join in. What does it mean to consider the other, or what does it mean to consider another point of view? And so I'm excited to dive in a little bit deeper around narrative change and the work that they're getting to do. I think that every conversation I have with Mike, I leave really inspired and about the own storytelling work that I do personally as well as organizationally. So super excited that y'all get a taste of that today too. So Mike, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I would love to hear, well, one, where are you tuning in from? Can you give us some context of like ASHA and where you are? Your accent gives away a little bit, but would love to hear a little bit more about where you're tuning in from and a little bit of your context.
Okay, so I'm tuning in from the UK. ASHA is based, our head office is about 100 miles west of London, due west. I'm actually at home at the moment, right on the south coast, which is 200 miles south of there. So I'm looking out across the sea at the moment, which is very nice.
Yeah, so a little jealous.
And yeah, it's great. So we work with organizations both locally where we are, nationally and internationally as well. What would you like to know about this?
Well, okay, we have encouraged people to check out y'all's website in the past. We're putting it in the caption area they'll go on there and they will see so many names that are familiar to them, work that maybe even concepts and themes that resonate with their own ethic and things that they're working on. You've been approached by so many different types of individuals and organizations to solve really complex problems or to invite them to consider how to solve complex problems. When you encounter, and maybe there's an example in here that you could give, but when you first encounter a narrative change project, what are the things that you're listening for beneath the surface? How do you know where to start? Because, I mean, as I'm thinking through some of the projects you've shared with me, whether it's about migration, whether it's about global warming, whether it's about faith, mental health, I mean, these are not easy things to address. So when people come to you to solve this, what are you listening for?
Okay, yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the phrase around narrative change is really interesting because it feels as though narrative change is actually an outcome rather than a thing.
Hmm.
And I think when we're looking to work in a particular area, one of the things that we look for is freedom and the freedom to innovate and to really do a multiplicity of things. We really feel that people are tired of being talked at.
Hmm.
You know, there was a moment during the Brexit debate in the UK when the UK was voting, in my opinion, wrongly to leave the EU, but where one of the politicians said everybody's tired of experts.
Hmm.
And I don't think that's true, but I think the truth in that statement is that we're all tired of shouting. And we're tired of people telling us what to think and not having any spaces where we can think for ourselves and really process things for ourselves. And in a sense, inhabit our own narrative. So I think narrative change is a really interesting objective. And we very much, as you say, we work with organizations big and small and of all different kinds. And generally, what we're doing with them is helping them for themselves create a new narrative about who they are, why they exist, why they add value to the world and what matters to them. And then also helping others, looking at how others can engage with that and how they engage with different audiences around that narrative. And so that's partly about kind of the space that you take in somebody's head. And it's partly about the way that you turn up. And the way that you turn up can be as much to do with behavior as it can about communications and a particular story that you're telling. So for us, it's very much, it's about a whole number of things. And it's often also about addressing a lens first before you address actual stories or actual kind of elements of communication. So I think we would say that narrative is, and the kind of narrative we work on is really helping organizations change their own narrative about themselves, but then looking at how they can engage with the outside world so that the outside world develops its own narrative in a way that we would want to happen. Does that make sense?
It does. And okay, you've got me thinking, because I studied advertising and marketing. And some of what you're saying, like somebody could categorize into that. And maybe even like if they were looking into your background and making assumptions based on organizations you've worked with, like they could easily like, oh, I think I'm going to put what he's just said into a box. And I'm rewatching Mad Men right now. So I'm like living into this whole world. What makes what y'all are doing different from just advertising and marketing? What makes, what's the there?
Yeah, so there's a few things probably. The things that I'd highlight are we always look when we're working with an organization, for what we would call a generative idea. Now, the sort of traditional structure of these things is that you tend to have brand and identity type agencies and experts. You have them, what we would call above the line advertising agencies, which is the Mad Men guys and the old Ogilvy, all that stuff. And that's actually about trying to get people to think about you in the right way. So that's the bit that's about what place you take in their heads and in their imagination and how they think about you. And then there's the bit that you'd call below the line, which is about actually trying to get people to buy your product. And the market has our industry has matured into that. And then alongside it, you've got like media people who look at placing media and all that kind of stuff. And that model grew out of the Mad Men era, where media was very simple and quite, there wasn't a lot of it. There was TV, there were posters, there were magazines, radio. That's about it. So when I started, that was kind of it. So you would begin. Sorry, this is a long answer, but I hope it makes sense. But the equation would be, you'd start with the customer, and you'd say, who is it that we want to talk to? And you'd look at who they were, and then you'd say, what media do these people consume? And then you'd look at the media that they need to consume. And then you'd say, how much of that media do we need to buy in order to reach enough people to sell enough of our product? And then we'd look at buying that media. And then you'd say, okay, what do we need to say in that media in order to get them to read it and buy it or to think the right thing? So it was that kind of equation. And that's the way the industry is still set up in many ways. The problem is now that media has exploded. So we don't know. And also it's not all media is predominantly not broadcast in the same way. There's still broadcast media, but so much of media is our choice about how we absorb it and how we take it. And a lot of it is literally in our hands. So we have the media in our hands, we swipe past it, we do whatever we want. So we're in control. So that kind of equation, what you get to hopefully an engagement with the media, but you're shouting as loud as you can or trying to be as funny as you can or as interesting as you can or beautiful as you can, whatever it is, in order to get through the noise. Now, Marcy and I both left the big agency world because we just didn't believe in that anymore. And actually what we believe in, and you can see our industry struggling to get to this now. There's a model now that starts with who are we? It starts with, and in fact, if you're a human being, you'd think about it much more like I hope we would. And it starts with who are we and what value do we have to the world? Why do we exist? What do we believe? What value do we have? And then when you get to what value we have, you say, why is that interesting to the world? And once you've asked that question, you can say, how do we help people engage with that? Which is a completely different way of asking the question. So I think so now the kinds of organizations that operate like this tend to be either new media, and there's just a few of us in the brand world, in my opinion, that do this. And we're one of those.
Okay.
Now, what we do with that, alongside that approach, is we look for what we call a generative idea. And that's very much about the lens. And it's about, rather than taking one narrative and forcing it down people's throats, it's creating a framing idea and then giving that framing idea to people, both internally to the organization and externally, and saying, if this is the way we see the world, how would you narrate this? Or how do you narrate that? So, you can see around you, we can all see around us people who have a particular way of seeing the world, and everything that they then experience, they fit into that narrative and just reinforces their preconceived narrative.
Yeah.
With organizations, you can pretty much every organization has within it a really beautiful idea and a beautiful reason that it exists and that it was initially established. And we look for that, and we look for an expression of that. So, shall I give you an example?
Please, that was going to be my next ask. Yes, please.
So, there's so many. Probably the easy ones that would be charity, some of the charity work, not-for-profit work that we've done. So we worked with the royal family on a programme that was put together originally by Prince Philip, which is called the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, which is a programme for young people. And it's a very clever program, and the young person learns a new skill. They have to do something that keeps them fit. They have to do a service in the community in some way. They have like a residential thing, and they do an expedition. And the problem, and there's a gold, silver, and bronze thing and everything. It's a very powerful experience for young people, and it's kind of promoted by the royal family through this charity and then into schools and prisons and goodness knows what else. The problem was that it became defined by the expedition, because actually when you're talking to a young person, prisons are another thing, but if you're talking to a young person in school, as soon as you get to the expedition, that's the bit that they're really interested in. And can I take my hairdryer across the mountains and all that kind of stuff. So the expedition became the main thing, and all of these other really important parts became sort of second-rate add-ons, whereas really they were the meat of it. And so the job was to take this, and this was a few years ago now, but to take it and actually help them think about really what was at the heart of it. So what is the lens for them as an organization to look at everything that they do, and how would they want young people to look at it? And generally these generative ideas are incredibly simple, but they're very powerful and they resonate at a very human level. So they're the kind of thing that when you hear it in an organization, always when we present them, people go, "Oh, you're so right. You're right. That is what it is." So we're not looking to invent something completely new. We're looking to call out the sense of that sense of who the organisation is or who the entity is and why they exist. So for the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, the generative idea was about helping young people live life as an adventure. So when you take that idea, you can then say, okay, if the young person has to do a stint at an old people's care home as their community service, and they really don't want to do it, and it's 6 weeks of in and out after school, and it's boring and all that kind of thing. It's not very glamorous, but you can take that and you can say, right, you're going to do this, and it's going to be an adventure. It's going to be heartbreaking. It's going to be joyful. It's going to be a bit disgusting sometimes. It's going to be a bit kind of challenging and tiring. You're going to feel up. You're going to feel down. We want you to tell us about your adventure. Come back and tell us about it. That young person will frame their experience in a completely different way. Yeah. So their narrative becomes different about the way that they're living it. And by the same token, you can do an annual review with an employee and you can say, we believe in adventure. Where is it you really want to go with your career? What is the adventure that you're on? And what's the next step? And what do we need to equip you with? And where do you feel as though you're a bit lost and all that kind of stuff? So you can structure internal conversations and you can structure the way you turn up in the world with the same lens and with the same generative idea. And I give you lots of examples of those, but one of the really powerful things about them is that they become both about behavior and about communications. And actually that's where you begin to see things change. And we've had we often have organizations come to us and say, it fundamentally changed the way that we see the world and the way that we talk within our organizations, and therefore also the way that we turn up for our audiences. So, so for us, I think the question was, why are we a little bit different? For us, it's that generative idea.
Yeah.
And of course, the old school agencies in our world were all about a visual corporate identity, which we still do. So we still create those things. But in the old days, you had like a kind of the brand police that sat in the head office and went, you can't do that, you must put it there, you can't do this, and you must do that. So it became a very prescriptive, kind of restrictive thing. And of course, in today's media, you can't behave like that. So you have to have something much deeper and something so that when the corporate identity is, and there does still have to be discipline about the way that you behave, obviously, but what you're doing is you're living it out of a sense of knowledge of who you are and what value you bring to the world and why you're turning up, rather than just what things need to look like or not look like, kind of thing.
Yeah. It's so powerful. And it's so, one thing that keeps rising up in me is the simplicity of like the hard work of listening. And I've been in spaces where your entire role, like you, Mike, your entire role was to listen to the stories of the people in that space, and you are remarkably good at that. And then also, like, and I say this as a woman who has felt very heard by you in that space. Like when you were listening to my own story, felt very heard by you, and you could feed it back without it being like you're explaining my life to me. You're not mansplaining. You've literally heard, you've really truly heard me in ways that my words maybe even didn't do my own experience justice. So can you actually talk about listening? Because it does seem like it feels so critical in the work, the way you do what you do, not just what you do, but the way y'all show up feels, and that critical element of listening.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, I guess. So in a way, what we do is about value, and it's about organizations and usually particularly entities understanding their value. So I'll talk about the individuals in a minute. But, brands, a brand does actually add value to the balance sheet of an organization. So Martin and I always start from the position that everyone has value. I mean, it's kind of fundamental to us and who we are. You'll see in the projects that are self-initiated by us as well, we really do believe that. And we believe that in terms of, regardless of demographic, sex, belief, gender, whatever it is, we believe everybody has value. And it's interesting because we've done quite a lot of work with organizations that help people in recovery from addiction. And there's a very strong psychological approach to that, which is around asset-based therapy.
Yeah.
And, we worked with one organization that people really, near to death pretty much on the streets would come into their clinics, and their head of psychology, his brief to the people that met them was, the first thing you say to them is positive, because they may have never heard anything positive in their lives. So we want their first message from us to be something that is both affirming and gives them value. And they would literally, and it would literally be, look, I know it's awful, but you're alive. You're alive, and we can work with you. There's a future, kind of thing. And I think we that's very much in our DNA. When we were working with them, it felt like, oh yeah, that's kind of what we believe when we go into organizations. And particularly in British organizations are quite different to Americans. So when you go into a British organization, they always start by telling you how awful they are, kind of thing. And they're much worse than anybody else you've ever worked with, and all that kind of stuff. So all of that is different. So there's a bit about actually value. And we just do believe that. That's kind of in our DNA. I think there's another bit, which is when we're talking to people, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? There's a narrative kind of that I grew up with, which is that you shouldn't be defined by what you do, and that what you do is just your job and all that kind of stuff. But of course, in reality, we all turn up to work, and our work is the way we do our work, and what we're doing and the way that we turn up to it and express ourselves there is an expression of who we are. Mm-hmm. So when we're listening to people as well, we're listening to why they feel that what they're doing is an expression of them.
Yeah.
And we get to some really deep, fascinating conversations with people. And it's also just interesting. I mean, we from a purely kind of selfish point of view, we get paid to talk to real experts about a massive range of subjects. I mean, when we were doing the project, we recently have been working with the Dutch, German, and Danish governments around a piece of coastline that joins those three countries together, and how they come together to protect it. And we got to speak to the most extraordinary environmental experts that you've ever met. It was absolutely fascinating, and it was kind of conversation where you think, regardless of the project, this is just really interesting. I wish I could carry. So, and when you talk to people who are passionate about what they do, and even sometimes if they're bruised and hurting and have kind of lost their spirit and lost their way in it, to actually listen to them and hear what they're saying is just very interesting and very rewarding. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but that's where we start.
I think, the whole reason we're here is storytelling, and so far I've just heard so much of you talking about the process of the story listening piece being so critical. So you're familiar with the RFP. You're working with a group that has one of these grants. It's an interesting task. The RFP is asking all of these grantees to address and think through. I would love your reflection on, one, the particular work obviously you're getting to do with Wesleyan Impact Partners, Rooted Good, Parrish Collective, and what they're particularly trying to do, what y'all's process there has been. But I think also at large, this storytelling initiative, when you first read it, when you were engaging with it, I'd love to hear from your perspective, what was underneath that for you? What were some of those, I don't know, even whether it's the generative idea that you're developing alongside these other organizations, or ones that you've encountered along the way in kind of working with them? Would love to hear, because Christianity in the United States is complicated right now. So how does this not turn into a PR campaign for American Christians,
I think that's everybody's worry, isn't it? And it's so again, I think there's a few things. I think there's golly, where do you start? I think there's a big question for each of the grantees, and we're looking at this in our group as well, around what's ours to do, and what can we, I guess, in many ways, in terms of who we are as a particular group, how can we be realistic and authentic and actually do the bit that's ours to do? Because it's one of those subjects that is so big, isn't it? And it's easy to stray into, is it a Christian thing? Is it a church thing? What does the word church mean? All those kind of questions, which are huge kind of, they're up for grabs, all of those words, aren't they, at the moment? So living in a space where we can peacefully inhabit our definition of those and communicate that, and also behave in a way that communicates that, becomes really important. And I think for us, the RFP, so we've worked with a couple of organizations that have had Lilly grants in the past. So we kind of we've seen the way that works. So we were looking at it thinking, we know that we'll get some freedom to do this, and the gang that we're working with are great. They're really good. And I think the other thing that's kind of interesting to us is that our group is not a church. So there's something kind of a little bit interesting about talking about church and not being a church and all of that kind of thing as well. So we're at the beginning of what we're doing at the moment. We've been doing lots of listening, as you were saying, and we're in the process of really putting boundaries around really what we are going to do and what we're not going to do as well. And also we've got a big piece of research running, and the target group, as much as we've just defined it at the moment, is the Duns. And there's a piece of research that's just kicked off a few weeks ago, but is kind of quite a broad piece at the moment that we'll look to narrow down around the target audience and everything as well. So I've forgotten what the question was. Sorry.
Well,
but,
I think it was broad, but I think like as you were reading that RFP and then how you're expressing that through this project, what's bubbling up for you on the narrative that needs changing here? Like how would you articulate that? And it may be too premature, and what does that process look like too would be helpful, but you've been naming that.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I would say is that there are dominant narratives. And I think the how and the what are very kind of connected, and it's hard to separate some of those out. So I guess the other thing that I would say is that I think there's a difference between the overall narrative and storytelling.
Yeah.
Now, we use, in a lot of our work, particularly where we're working with kind of toxic issues, we use art. And the reason that we use art, and Martin is an incredibly accomplished photographer, so often we're using his photography, and he kind of commissions himself to do a photographic project. I think the interesting thing around art is that artists are very present to a particular issue or a particular brief, if you like it. So they're very, very present to what they're creating in a way that most of us aren't. So they get to a point of real presence, and then their expression is given as a gift without strings attached.
Yeah.
And if we come back to that kind of everyone's tired of shouting, what happens with art and what we've seen with the projects that we've done is that what you then effectively can do is provide space for people to also be present to things and to create their own narrative.
Yeah.
And to actually, so it's a way, I think what art does is it respects the observer, the consumer, whatever you want to call it, but whatever the art form is, but it very much respects the person that is receiving the art. And it enables that space, which is very beautiful and very powerful. So I think that there's something really interesting around some of the storytelling in terms of how do we enable people's there to be a sense of resonance for their own story. So what are we telling and what are we listening to, and how do those two things relate to each other? I mean, again, one of the things that we very much believe in is that there's a human resonance. If in our faith we believe that we're all created in the image of God, then like a tuning fork, we resonate to
Yeah.
Godness. So there is engagement comes through resonance. So I think that's another thing that we're exploring in it. Now, where that resonance comes from doesn't matter that much. As long as it's there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I mean, it's a really interesting area as well, because I think the other issue is that most organizations, and we do, if you go to our website, you'll find a whole load of case studies, because that's what we do
Yeah.
on our website, and that's how people understand what we do. And there's a kind of organizational sort of magnetic pull towards case studies. And we have to resist that, because it's not really storytelling.
Mm.
And the real stories allow space for people to find themselves in them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. And then the other thing we're exploring is, how do we put and our objective is to enable and others to tell stories. So how do we actually create the tools and the ability for many people to tell stories?
Yeah.
And that will be one of our objectives. So we're kind of at the beginning of all of that at the moment.
So exciting. I'm so glad that you're walking alongside this wonderful crew of folks, and I'm excited to check back in as y'all continue in this work. I have one last question for folks listening, especially if they are grant recipients themselves and beginning this work, or maybe they're listening and they're kind of, already in, but like especially for those right now that are trying to begin this, trying to discern, doing their own listening of sorts. How do you help people? What advice would you give to them as they're just starting out and discerning the direction, the how and the why and the what that they're doing? What would you say to them right now? I know it's big because you don't know what all their projects are, but what would you say to them at their beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we always start. So in a way, a bit like with a human being, there's a real need to know who you are and kind of what you bring to the world in a way. So that sense of identity and kind of grounded sense of who I am comes from the inside. And that doesn't change. For me, some of my conversations are with a little local charity, and another one will be with the CEO of a global organization. And so I might turn up slightly differently in terms of what I'm wearing or some of the language I use or whatever, but who I am stays the same. So there's a piece around kind of who are you, and what is as I was saying earlier on, what's the kind of value that you bring, and to really kind of call that out. And then there's a piece that also says, and if we're going to be speaking to these people, how do we turn up for them? And how do we, and actually for them as well, how do we discover their pain? And how does our value match with their pain? And it might be that you turn up slightly differently for one group and another group, but if you know who you are, you can do that in a kind of coherent way.
Yeah.
So I think understanding those two things, and we have models that we use to do all of that and everything, but that's, and kind of not getting confused by the kind of push and pull of that.
Yeah.
Is kind of really important. And it'll also mean that what you create has a kind of depth and authenticity to it, but also gives you the freedom to know kind of how to sort of adjust things and be a bit more fleet of foot and respond to context and, societal changes and events and all those kinds of things. But out of that platform of this is who we are and this is why we exist. And I think that's the way I would say, start thinking about those things. There's so much to think about. And out of that sense of who you are also comes a sense of, and this is really what is ours to do, therefore.
Yeah.
Because it's such a big subject, this, and it feels, and actually, in terms of budget and all that kind of stuff, $5 million is not a lot of money at all for trying to achieve what we all want to achieve. So it is a real challenge, and it's something that, the kind of corporate model would be to throw a lot more money than that at it. But, we've got what we've got. And I think it's exciting.
It is. Mike, thank you so much. I so appreciate your time, your wisdom, and sharing a little bit of the work that you do. I always appreciate our conversations. And so I'm glad more folks are exposed to some of the ways you're thinking about doing this work now. So
you're really welcome. Thanks.
Okay. I'll stop recording. Okay. Thanks to Mike for his time and for the good work that he and ASHA are up to in the world, literally all over the world, doing great work. One of the things that I've really valued about getting time with Mike is getting to hear so many amazing, phenomenal examples of his work globally. Some of the ones that are happening right now in the life of ASHA aren't things that he could necessarily share or disclose. And so I'm excited to have one of his clients here with us, actually, Shannon Hopkins. So Shannon and the crew with Wesleyan Impact Partners and Parrish Collective have hired Mike and ASHA to do some work with them. So Shannon, will you share a little bit about what that's been like? What are they up to? What have you learned? All the things.
Yeah, I think, I've said to you guys before, like being inside, other people's process, like, and the pacing has been really different because, I've learned so much because to get a brand and an identity that will live and travel and actually resonate with a large percentage of the population, they started by going way, way, way back, not just to our audience. We also have an audience and distribution expert working with us who's done all the audience listening, like a real deep dive on how do, like what's the journey that dones, and, again, we're focusing on dones. What's their journey? How do they engage with content? How do you move them? How do you make sure your messages are going to resonate and not repel, right? So they've got that, and that's informing the creative. But there's another level of big desk research they started with. They did tons of listening. So I would say, every time I see your listening is sacred, Josh, I think, wow, it feels like we have done more listening in this work than any other I've ever done. And then, in the first workshop we did with Mike and ASHA, they presented that back. They took, something like 300 interviews, and then they coded them and they looked for the keywords and they themed them. And then they came to these 8 themes, with some core ideas. So like, for instance, with Duns, like there really is this space to recover and re-articulate the Christian narrative through grounded, authentic storytelling, right? Like this idea that Christianity story's been distorted, right? And then like church is a place of belonging, like Christian community, right? Is a place of belonging. It's not an institution, right? And there's a place for meaning making and grief and hope. And some of this is like this interplay between audience and our identity as like the 3 organizations coming together to do this project, right? And so who's actually launching this initiative, and how does it have an identity that once it goes live, it actually, the Duns can like find it resonates with them, but it also is like for us, it's going to have the impact we want it to have, which is like really giving a different vision of the role of the church. Like we keep saying church is a possibility. You know, that's an old Kierkegaard quote. Like, and never before has that been more true than today, right? Like that the future and purpose of the church hasn't been very well articulated in society. And so this is an opportunity to do that. So they've been working with all of our identity, our value. How does that come alive in a brand? And then making sure that as we do the audience, they work together. I've just used a lot of words and I might have done the same thing. It's hard without showing you, because then they are building a platform, which we have just seen the first take at, which we will be ready to show it to people in a few months. But like they have built a whole brand identity platform that will allow.
Shannon, what does that mean? I mean, that's one of those words that I think everybody inside of the marketing industry understands when you say it. And like Mike said stuff like that in the interview where he was like, "Oh, this is a platform." And I'm like, "But what is the only platforms that I know of are like ones that high divers jump off of in the Olympics." Like, what is a platform?
Okay, so it's both like it. That's a good. It's an identity that can live in multiple realms. So it will have like a website. It will have functionality so people can upload their stories to it and engage with it. But it's also can do print and media. It's all the brand. I'm trying to think of something else that acts like that other than like a Netflix or because it's not Netflix, right? Like we're not building a digital, right? But it's when you see other big brands that produce content in multiple formats, that's a platform.
And so somebody will be able to go to one place and access all of that content in one website or one digital space.
But it'll also feed and link into all the normal channels. So like if it's on that site, it's also on other Instagram or YouTube but it's really about the frame. I think maybe another way to talk about platform is to talk about the framework by which everything gets animated and released into the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe I'm going to nebulous, but I feel like one thing I really respect about the way Mike talks about the work that he does is he uses this word identity. He talks about identity a lot. But then also, I felt like even in the interview and other conversations I've had with him, a lot of the work is about getting the organization to do introspective work to say, who do you ultimately believe you are? And then who are you? He's working with 3 organizations to do work around storytelling, to come to a common place where that y'all can name. And regardless, whether you're 3 or 1, like one of the challenging things about this RFP, which I like get ignited by and so excited by, is the fact that what does it mean to come and know? What does it mean to know and love God? Like at the end of the day, it's requiring people to do really deep internal work. So that your audience isn't doing it necessarily in the same way you are of like, well, what do you even believe when you say that? So that you're producing out of that place. And in a way, I don't know, you talked about him doing identity work. Is there anything you can share about like shedding light on the process?
Well, that's kind of that, like how we got to the 8 themes and all of the conversations. I mean, they did big, deep interviews with all of us separately. And they also came to this place of what's the thing that's shared between our 3 orgs, which is helpful. But you're right. It is we're having to do this work so that we really know what are we trying to put out in the world? Because it's not just what the audience wants to hear. It's also for our intent.
Sure.
You know, one thing that's been really helpful in this last session, we were just all together in Boston, was they also get you really to think about who. Like, who's your client, who's your audience. So we think about this like our client is the future possibility. It's the possibility of church. The possibility, like that's really the client. The client isn't the done, right? Like, but it's, but our audience is the dones.
Interesting. Yeah, that's, how has it felt? Because how has it felt having somebody from the outside leading y'all through this? Because some folks, are debating, do we hire somebody to help us with this? Are we able to navigate this ourselves? So what's the value in hiring somebody like a Mike or like what ASHA does as an external voice into what you're doing?
The quality and caliber of the work goes up 1,000%. I actually just said to Blair the other day, this reminds me a little bit of when we did The Truth Isn't Sexy, that like we won awards, we had huge impact, but we did work with a firm. Like we knew what we wanted to do, but the quality and the impact it was able to have in the world was so much better. And I feel like this has driven, I think I do quality work. I mean, y'all might disagree with that, but
We do not.
But
we do not disagree with you. We agree that you do.
We agree. Yes.
Thank you. And,
as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, that can be taken both ways.
But I know that like what we're building with them is like my work is like D work and this is A work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference of hiring somebody else.
Yeah.
If I could just offer not to speak into your process, but I think when I've been around things like this, it also has this, this is not a reason enough to do it, but it is important and often discounted, which is that it makes you feel better and more excited about what you're doing over the long haul. That you have confidence that what you're putting out is going to be not just good, but great. And it's on the days that you wake up and you're like, overwhelmed with so many things and you might be inclined to put this aside or to miss a deadline or think like, who's really paying attention? You're like, wait, hold on. I need to match the level of this or at least honor the way that this work is getting out into the world. And there's something here worth like really honoring and getting up for. And that, because these things are long. Like it's, you're working on this for 5 years and there's going to be, your enthusiasm is going to wax and wane. And I just find I find having somebody external who's an expert at what they're doing is that can be really helpful for evening out those highs and lows.
Yeah.
And to give malleable prescriptive, but malleable prescriptive direction to just say, here's everything. We've asked you all the hard questions. We've got really into the nitty gritty and then be like, here is the pathway forward for you that I think having worked with groups like this before too, I think like, nobody asks you the hard questions in the way that somebody like Mike does, that you're like, okay, yeah, we don't know. We don't know the answer to that. And we need to figure it out.
And they keep you on track because sometimes you'll say, well, no, we don't want, we're not looking for this PR campaign for the church, right?
Right.
Right. Like that's, we don't really need that. Right. Like, but when we start going somewhere where it might sound like that, they bring you back to that. And is that really is that what you're saying? Is that, so they're a good check, a good barometer. And I think we can stay up here if you're with people just in your sector, there's a lot of inside speak. You don't even know it. Right. And so I think
you say things like platform.
You say things like platform. There you go. But even the way we talk about church or discernment, formation,
absolutely.
These words, like what do they mean? And
when leading the narrative change work in my role before, we hired a group called Rally out of California, not a faith-oriented group, but the foundation I worked for was faith-oriented. And a lot of folks there read scripture for the first time working with us because we kept referencing all of these stories and things. And actually the story and direction that we went with, Know Your Neighbor, came from somebody who had never really versed themselves in scripture, but they were even reading it and understanding it in a fresh way to even challenge our own understanding of faith. And it was so, so valuable to actually have somebody who was completely separate from, like you're saying, Shannon, the world that we were working in, to say, one, what you're saying does not make sense. And two, here's a perspective or way of thinking about it that we've never thought about. As you've talked about the platform, and I know some of this is both in the works and a little private right now as you're figuring out how the reveal is just as important sometimes as all of the work. So I hear all of that. But is there anything else inside of the work that ASHA has done with y'all outside of the platform that feels really concrete? Concrete in a way that folks can be like, oh, that is a possible idea or product from going through this type of process.
I'm really sorry. I'm not sure I can give that. I do think I'm happy to put these slides that I shared with the two of you in the show notes, because I think some of like the getting to like the opportunity, there's like one slide on there. I think there's some of that that's been helpful. One thing that came last week, which I've been chewing on, is they talked about every good story has a title. And one of their designers was talking about like Jesus is the ultimate like short form content deliverer. But even in that, every story, like we reference the Good Samaritan, the feeding of the 5,000. These are all things that had that. The parables all have titles. Yeah. And so like what it takes for actual stories to travel is not, there is the brand, and then there's the way the content gets wrapped up. And I think they've helped us get really clear about that.
That's super interesting. Well, and the power that's in a name. Yeah. Or to be able to name something and to be able to put boundaries around it.
Yeah, and I guess the one other thing, and I think they talk a lot about being really clear about what you're trying to do. Are you working above the line or below the line? You can help people have a new imagination, like you can, help them think differently, or you can help them do something different. You can't do both at the same time. And that,
Shannon, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
I was gonna. So much about like when you talk about the Duns to anybody, a lot of what you get back is that person's preconceived idea about the single bucket that group fits into. And a lot of times it's around church hurt, like these are people who've been hurt by the church. Sometimes it's around, like lack of formation when they were kids, like their parents never took them, and so it's the parents' fault. And a lot of times it's about politics. That it's that there's some sort of political undercurrent running through this. And in fact, just this week as we're talking, this study from the Billy Graham Center, but I'll point out using NORC's panels. So this is like a really high quality study saying that over half of Gen Z is repelled by the church when it supports Trump. Yeah. And they use that as like this is a key theme that runs through this emerging generation of either Duns or potential Duns. How do you keep any one of those things from like dominating all of your, like, do you make message? Because I don't see that in your 18s. Like your 18s are not actually divided up. Like, oh, we need one message for the church hurt people, and we need one message for the, people who never went when they were kids, and one political, like, how do you message across all those things, especially considering that that there's this like overarching like group ready to point a finger and fill in any gap that you leave with like their parents weren't good enough.
Yeah, no. So I think that's really a great question. And that's where Louise has been so helpful, because she's like, you take all of this composite and here's the needle you can thread that will avoid that. And so I don't know if that's a helpful way to answer that, but we are looking, one thing we are thinking about doing is gathering some people and sharing the data with from Louise, having Louise articulate that, because it's listening, and the dones are really broad, but what's the needle you can thread across all of them? And it's different research to think about audience, to then to begin to shift imagination to message to them in a way that is resonant, and not to try to get them to actual, it's just to like ignite their imagination, help them think about where they, maybe there's a signposting in different ways, but it's not trying to convince them of something. And then you can go, okay, well, for those that have been heard, or for those that are, it is very clear that they don't want, like across our surveys, like people are not interested when faith is politicized, or they don't want any political connection, which is a little bit problematic. Like, actually, the gospel is political. Jesus was political, but not in the way it's being done today, right?
I've had this kind of like fear about audience work that across storytelling that could be happening, and I'm not saying that I'm feeling that right now and listening to what you're sharing, but I would be curious of how y'all are thinking about ongoing learning inside of these years, because I think one thing that makes me nervous is that people will do all this learning up front and feel like they've got an audience like tied up with a bow. And how do we keep from, in this movement, like feeling like we're done learning? And are y'all thinking about that in your project as well?
We are. So that's the great thing. Interestingly, most audience research is disconnected from marketing and branding, and we intentionally put them together, and it's been really sweet to see them push and pull with each other a little bit. But the next thing we're going to do is we will test the platform and some initial stories so we're not just the campaign and branding, we're not just testing that, like the look and feel of what we're going to do. We're actually going to share some actual stories and see how it resonates with the audience we've been testing with, and we'll keep doing that over time. And then I do think, ASHA did a pilot story like in parallel and tested reach with that. Like, I think that's the other bit of how do we learn in this, is also by what happens through actual engagement. And that is their sweet spot, is you build the brand and then an identity to create something in the world and then prove that people engage with it. So that's anyway, I feel like this has been a lot more about us. And Josh, I think we should get Nikki and Lorenzo and you guys on soon and start.
Yeah, we have plans for that's on the schedules at some point but I don't think it should be me. I think it should be Nikki and Kyle. Kyle's the VTS person now. I'll cut all this out of the show, but it'll be good to do a deep dive from their perspective. In the same way that we had like Blair and Tim on. So Elizabeth, you want to wrap us up? Bring us home?
Yeah. Shannon, thanks for sharing. Everyone, check out her slides in the notes, because there's some really great stuff in there. Again, thanks to Mike and ASHA for sharing some both in this interview, but also in the good work with our friends with Rooted Good and Parrish Collective and Wesleyan Impact Partners. Thanks, y'all, for listening. To keep tuning in. We've got some great interviews coming up.
You've been listening to the Backstory podcast. For all the episodes and more resources, head over to www.futureoffaith.org/storytelling.